The first cases of the South American strain of the Zika virus, which is linked to brain disorders in newborn babies, has been detected in Africa. As many as 7,500 people could be infected with the virus in the island nation of Cape Verde off the continent's western coast. According to the World Health Organization, it is the same strain spreading through the Americas that is linked to cases of microcephaly. That's the abnormally small heads in infants. The World Health Organization, though, says it's not ready to suggest travel restrictions on the country. Let's get a bit more on this and speak to the virologist, Derek Gather, from Lancaster University. Derek, many thanks for joining us. Can you start by giving us a few more details about these Zika cases that have been discovered in Africa? Because my understanding is that Zika actually originated in Africa.
That's correct. Zika was discovered in the east of Africa in 1947, and we know that it's been in West Africa since at least the late 1960s. The first case in Nigeria was in 1968. Now, the Cape Verde Islands are off the Atlantic coast of West Africa, and we know that Zika was in Senegal, which is, of course, on the western coast of Africa, in the mid-1980s. So it seems that, in fact, this strain of Zika is not the African one, not related to the Senegalese strain, which is only a few hundred miles away on the main continent, but in fact is a strain that's made a circumnavigation of the world. It's gone from Africa to Asia sometime before the 1960s. Then, of course, recently it's made its way to the Americas, and it seems that it's then across the Atlantic from Brazil probably to Cape Verde, and Zika's now completed a tour of the world. So from an academic point of view, this is very interesting in terms of how the virus can spread, but the question, of course, that the patients are interested in is, what does this tell us about the biology of the Zika virus?
Well, what does it tell us, and how worrying is it that it is now spread to Africa? Could it potentially spread to Europe?
Well, we know, of course, that the Brazilian strain now does cause microcephaly, and there is some information from some recent tests that were done that suggests that perhaps the Brazilian strains are more virulent in terms of causing microcephaly than the African strains, but that's based on a limited number of lab tests. Now, in Cape Verde, we know it's a Brazilian strain, and we also have seen some microcephaly cases in Cape Verde in the last few months, although only a handful. So that's not particularly surprising, because we know that the Brazilian strain can cause microcephaly. If the Cape Verde strain had been an African strain, on the other hand, then it would have been more interesting from the medical point of view, because it would have demonstrated that an African strain can cause microcephaly, and we don't have any evidence for that now, because it's not an African strain, it's a Brazilian strain that's crossed the Atlantic. So we're still lacking a clinical demonstration that the African strain can cause microcephaly.
Where are we in the treatment of this virus?
As far as treatment goes, we don't really have any at all. It's just a symptomatic treatment for those that are infected, and the focus really has to be on prevention. There are very few good treatments for flaviviruses. We don't have a treatment for dengue fever. We don't have a treatment for yellow fever, other than just basic clinical support to try to keep the patient as well as possible. So the focus is on vaccination, and we have a good vaccine for yellow fever. It's been a bit difficult to develop a dengue fever vaccine, so we don't really know whether Zika will be a difficult one or a hard one in this respect, but apparently the National Institutes of Health in the USA are optimistic enough about vaccine development that they have penciled in a phase 1 trial for later this year, which, if they can get a vaccine developed, will involve 80 volunteers in the USA, and if that is successful and the vaccine that's developed is safe, then they'll be moving to a proper trial in the field sometime next year.
And how worried are you about the potential spread in Africa? How bad could it get there? I mean, assuming they don't have the sort of infrastructure to deal with it.
Yes, one big question is, does exposure to the African strain of Zika virus allow immunity to the South American strain? That's something that we don't know yet. Now, they're about 10% different from each other, so that's actually reasonably divergent, but not greatly divergent. Yellow fever, for instance, has 10% divergence between strains from South America and Africa, and we know that the yellow fever vaccine is protective against all strains of yellow fever, not just African ones, but all over the world. So consequently, we would probably expect that if you've been exposed to African Zika virus, then it's similar enough to American Zika virus that it would be protective. So we don't yet know what the real implications for Africa will be if the Brazilian strain does arrive on the African continent from the Cape Verde Islands. It might be that it will make no impact at all because the majority of people are already immune to it, or it might be that they don't have any immunity, and then we could see the same kind of epidemic of microcephaly in Africa as we've seen in Brazil.
OK, Derek, really interesting to talk to you. Derek Gatherer there from Lancaster University. Many thanks for your time.